22 budget. Tonight with us, well, I'm Tyler Ward, also select board members Bill Taylor and Ed Youngst. We have town administrator Nicole McStay. Finance director Leo Smith is with us. And we have Shannon Kelly here from the finance department. Allie Kreutz will be taking our minutes this evening, and Tim Brezovic is running our technicals. If you're watching us, you're either seeing us on Ustream by the town's website, Comcast Channel 22, Facebook Live, or maybe even on the YouTube. And as always, this meeting will be archived for future viewing. This evening, we will not be taking questions during the meeting. However, we would really like to hear any questions or comments that the public may have, so please submit those to selectboard@peterborough.nh.gov. And we will get an answer to you regarding the budget. And then, of course, when we have our public hearing at the end of our budget season, we'll be allowed to ask and able to get questions and answers then too. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Roland Patton, the chair of the budget committee, and he'll introduce the budget committee. Welcome, Roland.
Thank you, Tyler. First, I'd like to know how many we have. I think I've only seen 6, and I'll go through who we have here. Bob Lambert, you here? Bob?
Yeah.
Just say yes.
Yes.
See Carl Mobzino,
Yes.
Ronnie McIntyre,
Yes.
Jim Long,
Here.
Bob Hanson. Is Donnie Parkus with us? I see your name there now. Donnie is with us. Andy Slider.
Yep.
And Jim, I guess Jim Long. Jim Long is here too.
Yeah, you called me.
Oh, okay. Who didn't I call? Somebody that I didn't call. I guess we have everybody here. Richard Clark, that's the one. Is Rick Clark here?
No, I don't see him.
Well, we're going to be talking about the 3 budgets: police, fire, and ambulance. And I'd like to introduce Chief Gannard to go through his presentation of the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Begin with, I received some news about, in the last hour, from the Finance Director, Leo Smith, that one of the highest increases in the documents that you may have before you, that being the retirement account, more likely than not be reduced by $37,000. We will confirm that tomorrow. It was apparently a miscalculation when that $120,611 was calculated. That included retirement costs for part-time officers. It was later realized that part-time employees do not pay into the retirement system, nor does the town on their behalf. So bottom line is looking at a $37,000 decrease on that line item, which also comes off of the bottom line. That figure would then be reduced to $83,611. That's still the largest increase from last year's budget compared to the proposed FY 2022 budget. Second largest increase is the salary line, $58,275. Then the replacement of our pickup truck, which has been taken off the road, it's $16,900.
Chief, could I interrupt here?
Certainly.
I want to call everybody's attention to, starting with supplies, if we look at under the column budget used, the percentages are off. For example, in supplies, 1494 is not 60% of 6,500. Or am I getting getting my what I think are the percentages from using the wrong numbers?
Barney, can you mention that account number again as I'm looking at the detail, please?
Yes, supplies. It's 61.
There's a number of supplies accounts in their various departments.
6,100.
Yeah, it's GL number 10120000161
So correct me if I'm wrong,
Well, okay, so the way this calculates is saying, let's see, yeah, I'm just trying to take a look.
1494 is
Well,
not
1494, yeah.
is not 60% of 6500.
Yeah, I see that. So it probably just calculation might be.
Well, the percentages are off all the way down until the bottom row. So I just wanted everybody to be aware of that.
Yeah, I see what happened.
17. Oh, I see what happened, yeah, because it should be, ED 17 should be, yeah, it's off, it's going down one, yeah.
Yeah,
We
it's
can make that,
calculating.
yeah.
So for example, that line, it should be reflect an increase of 23% rather than 60%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get this sheet corrected and send it back out to everybody.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. So Leo, you will take care of that?
You do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, signing back off for the moment.
Okay, continuing on, that would, after the $37,000 is removed, is deducted from the 12611, that would then show a bottom line increase of 153,873.
Yeah, we're getting an 8.7% increase over last year.
Correct. But again, it's primarily in those three accounts. All of the other accounts are either up slightly or down. And the other thing I wanted to point out is this year, just under 87% of the budget is tied up in salary and benefits, as it typically is every year. Those are the highlights of the budget there. There are two other things I'd like to discuss, unless there are any questions so far.
Any questions, anybody? I think we're okay, Chief.
Okay. We've asked for an increase of $10,000 on our staff development account. Over the last year, given some of the events that have occurred throughout the country, and the discussions that we've had with individuals and groups, the Governor's Council on Task Force, on transparency, and then the Governor's recent order regarding training, we will be seeing a very different approach to police training. I've got some examples that we've already begun to see. I've got a new recruit in the current academy class, which just started. He's actually attending classes that we've never seen before at the recruit level. I'll run down through a couple of examples here. Classes entitled Community Diversity, Police Legitimacy, and Procedural Justice, something entirely new. Interacting with the deaf and hard of hearing, dementia and Alzheimer's dynamics, autism awareness, mental health dynamics, effective police interactions, and then a very new one, the acronym to this is ABLE, A-B-L-E, Active Bystander for Law Enforcement. And with the new law that took effect January 1 of this year, police officers not only have an ethical and moral obligation, but now they have a legal obligation to report any police misconduct to the department head, which would be me in Peterborough. Turn from there, I'm required to notify the police academy, police standards and training within 7 days in writing. So these things do not fall through the cracks, they are investigated. The police academy has the authority to strip somebody of their certification as a consequence, as well as prosecution if it becomes necessary. But we've got a lot of online classes coming up where there's a cost associated with it. Many of them are, for instance, $97 per person. Some of these classes will be taught virtually through the police academy once their calendar comes out, but that has yet to be released. I'm attending one myself this coming Friday. The name of that class is Diversity in Recruiting and Hiring for Law Enforcement. This course teaches different strategies on how to diversify your police force through hiring. So that should be an interesting class. So a lot of changes for police training coming this year. Lastly, I'll read from my notes here. Over the last several months, I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of individuals in small groups regarding race and police practices in Peterborough, as well as practices throughout the country. Through these conversations, what I heard over and over again was the possible use of social services provided by social workers in lieu of police intervention, which has typically been the case for many people when they're in crisis. This is a concept that's becoming quite popular throughout the country, sending social workers in to intervene and to help people where traditionally in the past, people have relied on the police or the 911 system. Near the end of 2020, town officials, Nicole, Karen Hatcher, and several others, myself included, began discussion with staff members from the River Center to provide a lot of social services for people throughout the community and beyond. These discussions resulted in identifying the need for a way to help individuals in need of social services before they fall into what we refer to as a crisis mode. The River Center has now put forward a proposal to hire a community resource specialist, a new position, to fulfill the role of assisting people in need of these services. It's believed that through those in need will benefit from available services and avoid crisis that in the past often resulted in police intervention. Quite frankly, we're not social workers. So we were kind of strapped as to how we could or could not help those people. This sounds very promising. The River Center has asked for funding assistance in the amount of $15,000 for this position. With the assisted funding, the town of Peterborough, specifically the Police Department and Human Services, would then have a valuable resource to respond more suitably to people who call for help. What I'm recommending this evening is to reallocate $15,000 from the current Police Department salary line and apply it toward this position. That's it on that. If you folks have any questions on that or not? This would result in the elimination of one part-time position from the police department. Put a great deal of thought into this, and I think it's a worthy effort.
Any questions?
Yes.
Tyler?
Not so much a question, but thank you, Chief, for your efforts this year and moving in this direction. I know it means a lot, and hopefully it'll help a lot of people. So great move. Good to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. To get to your email specifically, I think the training that I briefly outlined, as well as the reallocation of funds for this position, that I hope is a direct answer to the email that you forwarded.
Yes, I think that's what the person was getting at when they asked me. So it is definitely, yes, you've come through, I think. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, Scott, is there any, taking 15,000 away from the salary line in that part-time office, I believe it must be a part-time officer, is this going to increase the overtime for the other officers?
It is not.
Okay.
Now that we are fully staffed, and the way we've structured, we'll be restructuring the schedule for the part-time officers. As long as we remain fully staffed, I'm confident this will work.
Thank you.
I'm not sure you mentioned this, I might have not heard it, but what percent time does this 15,000 represent? The new position is presumably part-time.
Yeah, it's gonna be, so there's $15,000 coming from the town of Peterborough. There's money that the River Center will be putting up, and the River Center will also be seeking funding from other sources. We've already initiated conversations with the school district and other communities. I don't know, Mandy, I don't know if you want to jump in on that at all. But this is not just gonna be a town of Peterborough position, this is gonna be a regional position. We see this as better as being a sort of a shared service, because we went round and round with it, and unfortunately, we couldn't see where we could really fund, we had the need to fund a separate position just for the town of Peterborough. Honestly, we're a very small community, and the work that we've been looking at would be, you know, as needed, which isn't all the time. So it made more sense to take a more regional approach to it, since we know that other communities, you know, from time to time will struggle with getting services to the clients, you know, to their welfare clients, for instance, or to the, you know, the people who require police services, because we're just not equipped to offer everything. So this is looked to be something of like, a little hard to describe it briefly, but it's not exactly a social worker. This is a person who's going to be helping to coordinate services for a person who is in need. So they may not be providing, you know, direct counseling services, for instance, but they may be referring that person to counseling services and then following up with them later to see if, you know, that was working for them, if they did follow through on making appointments, if they need more assistance filling out applications, which can sometimes be very complicated, that sort of thing.
I see, and is the 15,000 stay in the police budget though?
The 15,000 will, yes, it'll be in the police budget and will be payable to the River Center.
So if what I heard you say, Nicole, is correct, this is an as needed position, and it could mean that we could overspend it or we could underspend it. My question is, say if needed much more than what we budgeted for, would we have to look around in some other part of the police budget to add to it?
Sure, it's a good question. We actually look at this as being more of a contracted service. So we would be contracting with the River Center to provide this service to us. They would be hiring this employee, it would be a River Center employee. Our contribution would simply go towards funding that position.
Okay, that sounds good.
This is a resource that'll be beneficial to the police department as well as human services. When they have somebody that we as individuals cannot help, but we've got somebody we can refer them to. There'll be mental health issues, the substance abuse issues. We're limited as to what we can do ourselves. Some of these people.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, I have a question. How, who do these people call? Do they call the police first, or they call River Center first? I mean, how does it work? I mean, you know, you don't know this person needs help until the police go to there. The police are already there. Do they contact this other person or what?
Well, an example, Bob, would be we get a lot of calls for families who may have a child or an adolescent that is having a hard time controlling, that's having some emotional issues. We're limited as to what we can do for them. But at least now we have a resource we can reach out to who will make the connection back to the family, better assist them.
Thank you. Chief, I have a question. You said that it eliminates one part-time position. Is this an existing position? It is going to reduce the existing head count under your
Yes.
control?
Yes, by one individual.
Okay. Are there any other expenses tied to having a part-time person that also get eliminated?
No, they do not. Again, town does not pay into the retirement system on their behalf. There are no benefits.
Be pretty much limited to payroll taxes and that sort of thing.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And
Very
equipment.
small dollars.
And 15,000, it's not that big, yeah.
Correct.
One other thing, Chief, I noticed, if I'm reading it right, that there's an increase in revenues expected in the police department. I'm wondering if
Yes.
that's inflation, or is it something else that you're expecting?
Traffic details. You've probably seen officers out with the tree trimming crews and the Eversource crews, paving crews and that sort of thing. As time moves on, we're getting more and more demand for assisting with traffic control. And those are officers that are off duty. They're being paid out of an account, which is then being billed to the utility company. But as we see the demand increasing, our costs are increasing as well. So you'll see a change from 50,000 to 75,000. We gross budget that amount, knowing that we'll recover that, and actually a little bit more through the billing.
Thank you.
Well,
Do you have anything else you want to go through, Chief, or?
I don't at this point. Those are the highlights were on those three areas.
Yeah. Is there any other, does anyone have any other questions they want to ask the chief?
Are we gonna have any trouble with town sharing?
Are we doing, I'm sorry, one more time, Bob?
Is the town of Sharon 98,000, are they gonna be willing to pay that? Because in the past years, they always complain about what they have to pay.
Last 3 or 4 years, they've been very satisfied with the billing and the services. It's the feedback that I have received.
Thank you, Chief. I guess
Okay.
that's it. We have no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, Chief, we do have one quick question. Zach Green asked about the shotguns line item. Is that something from the year, last year's, or?
Oh, yes. We had shotguns that were 30-plus years old. One of them actually failed on us. Thankfully, it was when we were in the process of having to put down a moose that had been hit by a car. But in order to replace those, I had to encumber the funds into the current fiscal year. Due to the shortage of firearms nationwide, I'm still waiting for their arrival. Hopefully that answers his question on that.
We'll see. Thank you.
Okay, okay. But the firearms were failing. Again, they're more than 30 years old. They've been exposed to a lot of weather elements, range exercises and that thing. It's one of those things that they don't last forever.
Good time to replace them then.
Yes.
Anybody else?
That looks like it on Facebook.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, Chief.
All right, thank you, folks. Have a good evening.
Chief Walker, I think you're up on the fire department?
I am.
Yeah.
So thank you folks for having me tonight. I want to start out thanking Shannon and Leo. One of the things we looked at this year was trying to really drill down and identify some of where our annual costs are. I mean, quite often in the budget categories, we wind up taking money from one account, putting it towards the other, as we get towards the end of the year to kind of even things out. And Shannon and Leo did a really good job this year in sort of going through, and you'll see in the notes section, a lot of things that we looked at came out to sort of 3-year averages or 2-year averages or expected increases based upon what Leo's been able to see for a lot of consistent costs there through some of our contracted vendors. Things that are sort of outside my control as the department director. So a thank you to them on that. Really the two things I want to talk about, other than the fire station, are our one capital item this year, which is for $40,000 for a radio project, just to refresh folks' memories. We started 3 years ago with a request for a total of a $120,000 project to replace our portable radios. Portable radios are the handheld radios that firefighters and EMS providers carry on their person when operating at an emergency scene. With the fact that the radio is something you rely on, during an emergency or during a crisis, we felt that it was important to replace all the radios at once so folks didn't have to think about, this is the radio I'm using today when I'm in this piece of apparatus or in this particular scenario. So we started a capital reserve fund 3 years ago for a total of $120,000 to obtain the funds necessary to replace those radios. This year, if the town were to fund that for the third installment, we would utilize those funds to replace our portable radios and have that. The other thing that, beyond the numbers in here and the changes that we looked at, that I'm pretty excited about and we're able to fit into our overall budget, was we went through and reallocated our staff hours to look at a couple of things. One is the decreasing number of firefighters that we have responding to calls, the decreasing number of firefighters we have in general, and also the fact that although we've lost some senior folks, we have been fortunate enough to get some newer members in. So newer members require sort of a different type of training than some of our older members. A lot of the basic skills that are required, whether it's a firefighter one training or those individual modules, are done through the academy and can be done outside of the department. So we sort of shifted some of the money around with that. But one thing that anybody who sort of has seen or looked at news, are folks that really just aren't coming into calls anymore. Not only are our general numbers down, but the availability and the willingness of those and other things is really decreasing nationwide. Years ago, the department had an annual stipend program where they would provide a stipend to criteria. So in laying out the budget this year, I worked with our deputy chiefs and captains, and then later with Nicole and Leah, provide a little more of an incentive for those people to come into fire calls. I think I realized that coming to fire calls will probably never be the first priority in your life. We could implement that would encourage folks to be active participants in the department, both on the training side and on the call side, and provide them with a stipend. So it really is open to any of the members of our department. The timeline for this would be December 1 through November 30th. The idea that we paid as holiday costs, trying to clean up stuff themselves at the end of the year. The other thing, by placing it in the middle of the fiscal year, is it gives us a feel as to exactly what the year, so we're not in a position where we're having to do away with things that may be critical at the end of the year as we're working through this. So the stipend is divided into two tiers. The individual must be a member in good standing with the department, no pending or previous disciplinary actions, be present or excused from one and more administrative functions. Individuals are also asked or required to attend 75% of those trainings, in addition to we are called and volunteer fire department. So, the expectation is that with the exception of a few retired folks, we're fortunate enough to have our folks all work full-time jobs, real true family commitments, events out of town, parties, gatherings, child care, in some cases here, care of elderly parents. All we have would be in a much better position to provide the level of service to the community really needs. And we feel through responding. Fortunately, for consistently coming into all of our calls and making themselves available for all of our calls. Any questions to that, Roland or anyone else? Operations salaries. So again, as I said, by putting it in the middle of the year, the idea is that if we were fortunate enough to have 100% of our members make that, the 2,000, if we got to a point in April or May where we had to postpone a training or ask somebody to wait a couple of months to attend an off-site training because we had where we placed it.
So it was about 18,000 roughly?
But if 100% of our members were to meet that threshold, it would cost us a total of $18,000.
Elsewhere or some other reason for calculating that $1,200 is going to change behavior?
$1,200 is similar to what the stipend was previously in 2008, 2009, and at the time the stipend was $1,000. So we looked at, with the increase in time, the chief officers are discussing bills before the end of the year, or getting ready to pay your taxes.
Thank you.
Any other questions, anybody?
The non-operating, the non-tax funded stuff. So when looking at the emergency management, of course, the biggest focus of that for the last. So one thing that is not shown on here is COVID, because it's a sub-account, if you will, of our overall. So those have been expenses that are unique and expenses that we would not have made had it not been for COVID. There are a lot of other that we're able to roll into our operating budget and looking at that. The other part of that is some other stuff that we've been tracking separately, and overtime isolation for individuals that have had close contact to individuals who tested positive or are suspected to have COVID and have been quarantined. So there have been some overtime costs. Those funds was a blanket allocation to every community based upon population for that community. So Peterborough's total allocation of CARES Act money to offset election expenses. Those folks that were around polls got to see the huge number of absentee validates the fact that they're on voter rolls. That application then gets turned into a package that gets mailed out to them. That goes out, it comes back in, gets checked. Those who are cleaning, additional supplies for gloves and other stuff beyond what the state supplied. So again, there was an allocation through CARES funding the state had. The state, and those expenses are going to be used between now and the end of the year to balance off and even out those expenses that the town had that cost. There was additional sick and vacation time that individuals were afforded through the Family First prorated allocated sick time for part-time employees. We had several individuals in multiple departments that were placed in a position where they had to utilize that time. So reimbursement from FEMA. We have some outstanding FEMA funds that are in the process of being applied for, vetted through the state and then through the Region 1, getting that stuff squared away. That through the end of the pandemic, through the federal disaster declaration for that, which just coincidentally started on February 13th, March 13th, Friday. So bring that back in. For COVID, for COVID response, and we are from emergency response perspective in relatively good shape in terms of preparation efficiencies. When we, along with everybody else, is looking out for gloves and gowns and masks and face shields and all the rest of that. We've reached a point where we've got a pretty good, along with that, we also have built up a little bit of a, not the word surplus, but a little bit of buffer through our use, so we're no longer really worried about running out of things from before that.
Any questions, anybody? No, not yet, I don't believe.
All right, I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll get to that later, Chief.
All right.